There were 36 vacancies on the short-term rental platform for every single vacancy on the long-term rental market.
Nicole Gurran, thank you for joining the business. To begin with, is short-term holiday rental accommodation exacerbating Australia's housing crisis?
Well, unfortunately, it's not helping. We know our biggest housing crisis is the lack of available, affordable rental stock, and we see that lack of stock is the greatest in the places where we have high concentrations of short-term rental accommodation as well.
Speaking of areas that are sort of highlighting the problem, Tasmania is the only state to require registration at the booking level. So you have the numbers on that state, and particularly in Hobart. Now, the ratio of Airbnbs and longer stay rental accommodation, what's the ratio in the market like?
Look, when we did the study, so December 2024, for instance, there were 36 vacancies on the short-term rental platform for every single vacancy on the long-term rental market in Hobart.
That sounds worrying.
Look, it's a serious situation, and it explains why renters in Hobart struggle so much to find a place to live.
Look, this is clearly an impost on renters. Take Barcelona, for example, in Spain. Now, it seems to be leading the push on bans on Airbnbs completely. Is that a viable option here?
Look, at the moment, we're not even requiring in many states Airbnbs to be registered. Now, the New South Wales government has a registration system. Western Australia has moved to encourage investors to put short-term rentals back on the long-term market and enabled local governments to enact their own planning rules. But at the moment, the strongest we would see would be a limit on the number of nights a property is able to be used as a short-term rental in a calendar year, and that's trying to preserve the long-term housing stock.
Looking at across the country, if we're trying to get a level playing field here, especially for renters, obviously, at a minimum, could we see Australia-wide registrations that are uniform across state and territories, similar to what they do in the EU?
The EU is moving to require all registration, but also, very importantly, to require the platforms to share their data with local regulators, and that's the key. The policy response doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all, and hopefully in the future we will see a situation where we don't have a rental crisis, for instance, and then holiday rental accommodation can very happily coexist with the long-term housing stock. But to get the policy settings right, you do need effective registration, and you do need local governments in particular to be able to respond to housing needs in their own communities. Regulation, registration and platform accountability is the way to put that framework in place.
It all helps, right? Just drilling down a little bit into a sort of a practical sense. Emergency services workers in Australian regional towns and perhaps in remote locations or in holiday areas, it's really critical that they can find long-term rental accommodation. What's the outlook for them?
Well, look, at the moment, ironically, what we're seeing is that many former hotels, motels, caravan parks, so tourist accommodation is being turned over to a very inadequate, often very inappropriate and not necessarily affordable long-term housing stock, or even, temporary housing stock, but for workers, while ironically you've got, homes designed and planned for families to live in, certainly essential workers to live in, available for tourists.
You're talking to policymakers as part of your job, looking at the rental market, looking at the housing crisis. What's the environment for renters looking like in 10 years' time?
Look, if things continue the way they are, it's completely unviable. Australia's private rental market was designed to be a transitional tenure between, the home of mum and dad and becoming a mum or a dad yourself and moving in with a family and, with your family into home ownership. Now, we know households are different. We know housing careers are different, but what hasn't changed is our rental market settings. And so we need protection for renters so that we see long-term rental products. We need long-term rental leases. We need much more affordable and high quality rental stock, and government is going to need to play a role not only in regulating the quality of rental accommodation but also subsidising social and affordable housing. We need to reinvest in that sector.
Well, Nicole Gurran, it's a fascinating report. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining the business.
Thanks very much, David.